Before we descend into the darkness that engulfs the city of Philadelphia, I want to invite you to join me on this journey. Stories like this are not only about crime, but about human psychology, the fragile line between justice and revenge, and about ordinary people pushed to their very limits. If you are someone who loves stories that explore the darkest corners of society, the tense battles of wits between predator and enforcer of justice, then hit the subscribe button. That way, you won't miss a single detail as we unravel the mystery of the Echo. Now, turn off the lights, lock the door. Our story begins. The silence in Arthur Vance's penthouse was the first thing that struck Detective Miles Corbin as wrong. It wasn't the quiet of peace, but the profound, heavy stillness of a vacuum, as if the very air had been stolen from the room. Perched 50 stories above the rain-slicked streets of Philadelphia, the apartment was a monument to wealth and power. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a glittering, indifferent cityscape. A half-full glass of what looked like single malt scotch sat on a marble coaster, a perfect circle of condensation weeping onto the stone. Everything was immaculate, a curated display of success. Everything except for Arthur Vance himself. He was seated in a plush leather armchair, facing the sprawling view but seeing none of it. His head was tilted back at an unnatural angle, his eyes wide and vacant, reflecting the city lights like two dead stars. There were no visible wounds, no blood, no signs of a struggle. His bespoke suit was unrumpled. He looked like a man who had simply stopped. Emmy's preliminary report is in, Detective Isabella Izzy Rossi said, her voice cutting through Corbin's thoughts. She stood by the doorway, tablet in hand, her youthful face a stark contrast to the grim scene. At 28, she was a decade and a half younger than Corbin, a digital native in a world he still navigated with analog instincts. No signs of forced entry, no defensive wounds, no obvious cause of death. It's like he just fell asleep and his heart forgot to wake up. Corbin grunted, his gaze sweeping the room again. He was a man built of sharp angles and weary observations, his face a roadmap of too many long nights and too many grim mornings. People like Vance don't just forget to wake up, Izzy. Their hearts are wound tighter than a $10 watch. Something stopped it for him. He knelt beside the body, careful not to disturb anything. The air around Vance was cold, colder than the ambient temperature of the room. Corbin leaned in, his eyes catching a glint of something unnatural. What's this? Using a pen to gently part Vance's lips, he revealed the source of the glint. Resting on the dead man's tongue was a single, tarnished silver coin. It was old, the image worn smooth with time, but the shape was unmistakable. Izzy came closer, her eyes widening. A coin? What the hell is that supposed to mean? A message. It's always a message, Corbin murmured, standing up. 30 pieces of silver for the betrayer? Payment for the ferryman? This isn't a robbery. This is a statement. A sermon. Arthur Vance was a titan of Philadelphia's philanthropic scene. His face was plastered on hospital wings and university libraries. He was, by all public accounts, a secular saint, a man who had built a tech empire from nothing and spent his life giving back. Who would want to deliver a sermon to him? The first 48 hours were a maelstrom of dead ends. The building's security system was state-of-the-art, but the killer had left no trace. No unfamiliar faces on the CCTV footage, no unauthorized keycard swipes. It was as if a ghost had walked through the walls. The autopsy was equally frustrating. The medical examiner, Dr. Alistair Finch, a man who had seen every horror the city could conjure, was baffled. His heart just stopped. Miles, Finch explained over the phone, his voice tinged with professional frustration. No toxins we can identify, no signs of asphyxiation, no embolism. It's like his body's electrical system was simply switched off. I've never seen anything like it. And the coin, it's Roman. A denarius, probably from the time of Tiberius. The kind that would have been in circulation in Judea. The symbolism is as loud as a foghorn. Corbin and Izzy spent the next few days buried in Vance's life, peeling back the layers of his public persona. They interviewed his estranged wife, his business rivals, his sycophantic staff. They found the usual skeletons. Quiet affairs, ruthless business deals, a son struggling with addiction. There were dozens of people who might have disliked Arthur Vance, but none who seemed capable of such a bizarre, silent, and flawlessly executed murder. The media, catching wind of the strange details, went into a frenzy. They didn't have a suspect, so they created a monster. They needed a name. By the end of the week, the moniker had stuck, coined by a sensationalist columnist, the Echo, because the killer left behind only a faint, chilling echo of their presence. Just as the Vance case was beginning to grow cold, the echo struck again. The second victim was Senator Margaret Thompson, a firebrand politician known for her staunch family values, platform, and her ruthless legislative tactics. She was found in her historic Society Hill townhouse, not by a family member, but by her chief of staff after she missed a series of important calls. The scene was eerily familiar. Thompson was sitting in her study, a book open in her lap, a cup of tea growing cold on the table beside her. No forced entry, no signs of a struggle, and, discovered by a horrified Corbin who now knew what to look for, a single silver denarius resting on her tongue. "It's him. It has to be," Izzy said, her voice low as they stood outside the townhouse. The street now a chaotic tableau of flashing lights and news vans. The MO is identical. Same impossible entry, same clean kill, same goddamn coin. "He's escalating," Corbin said, his jaw tight. "From a businessman to a U.S. senator. He's not just killing people, he's killing symbols. Pillars of the community. He's making a point." "But what point?" Izzy countered, swiping through her tablet. "Vance and Thompson had no connection that we can find. They didn't run in the same circles, didn't have any shared business interests, didn't belong to the same clubs." "The connection isn't on the surface?" Corbin insisted, a familiar cold dread seeping into his bones. This was the feeling he got when a case was about to consume him. "The connection is whatever this killer thinks they did wrong. He's a judge, jury, and executioner. We're not looking for a random psychopath. We're looking for a zealot." The city plunged into a state of quiet panic. The wealthy and powerful, who had always believed their money and influence insulated them from the city's violence, were now terrified. Security systems were upgraded. Bodyguards were hired. Philadelphia's elite were looking over their shoulders, wondering who among them was next, and why. Corbin and Izzy worked themselves to the bone, their lives shrinking to the confines of the precinct's incident room. The walls were covered with photos of the victims, maps, and timelines, a chaotic tapestry of a mystery with no center. They felt like they were fighting a phantom, an enemy who left no physical evidence, no witnesses, no mistakes. It was Izzy who found the first thread, late on a Tuesday night, fueled by stale coffee and sheer stubbornness. She had been conducting a deep-dive forensic analysis of all the victims' electronic devices, a task so vast it was like trying to map the ocean floor. "Miles, you need to see this," she called out, her voice sharp with excitement. Corbin, who had been dozing in his chair, was instantly alert. He walked over to her workstation. On the screen was a seemingly innocuous photo from Arthur Vance's laptop. It was a picture of a new hospital wing he had funded, a standard PR shot. "Okay, I'm looking," he said. "It's a picture of a building." "Look closer," Izzy said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She ran a program and the image flickered. Hidden within the digital data of the photograph, embedded through a complex steganographic algorithm, was a tiny, encrypted text file. He hid it in the image's junk data. It's almost impossible to find unless you know exactly what you're looking for. The file's creation date is the day before Vance's death. "Can you open it?" Corbin asked, leaning in, his heart thumping. "Working on it," she muttered. "The encryption is military grade, but it has a vulnerability, a sort of logical key. It's not about brute force. It's a riddle." For 20 minutes, the only sound was the soft clicking of Izzy's keyboard. Corbin watched, his fists clenched, as she navigated a labyrinth of code. Finally, the file decrypted. A single line of text appeared on the screen, stark and white against the black background. Quid est veritas? What is truth? Corbin translated the Latin, his voice a whisper. It's a question. The question Pilate asked Jesus before his crucifixion. Izzy's face was pale in the glow of the monitor. Miles, I went back and ran the same deep scan on Senator Thompson's devices. I found a file, hidden the same way, in a photo of her at a prayer breakfast. She opened another window. Another line of text appeared. The first shall be last. These aren't just messages, Corbin said, a profound and terrifying understanding dawning on him. This is the killer. He's not just leaving a coin. He's leaving a digital ghost. He's talking to us. They weren't just hunting a killer anymore. They were engaged in a dialogue with a monster who believed he was an instrument of some higher, terrible truth. And the game, they both realized with a chilling certainty, had only just begun. The Echo wasn't just killing his victims. He was putting their very souls on trial, and he had just invited the Philadelphia Police Department to watch. The discovery of the hidden messages changed everything. It was like finding a key to a room they didn't even know existed. The investigation, once a frustrating slog through physical evidence that wasn't there, now had a new, terrifying dimension. They were in a conversation with the Echo, a one-sided dialogue where the killer held all the cards and dealt them out in cryptic, biblical phrases. The pressure from the mayor's office and the FBI, who were now consulting on the case, was immense. The city's elite were screaming for answers, and the media was a ravenous beast, feeding on the public's fear. The Echo was no longer just a local crime story. He was a national nightmare. What is truth? And the first shall be last, Corbin mused, pacing in front of the evidence board. The phrases were now written in large letters, mocking them from the center of the wall. They're not random. They're targeted. They have to relate to the victims. Izzy, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep, was furiously cross-referencing the phrases with every aspect of the victims' lives. It's a puzzle, Miles. He's not just taunting us. He's giving us clues. He wants us to figure it out. It's part of his ritual. The judgment isn't complete until the sin is made public. That was the breakthrough. They weren't just looking for a motive for murder. They were looking for the specific sin the Echo was punishing. They started digging again, this time with a new lens. They weren't looking for enemies. They were looking for hypocrisy. For Arthur Vance, quid est veritas? The truth was buried under layers of offshore accounts and shell corporations. Working with an FBI forensic accountant, Izzy uncovered a massive charity fraud. The Vance Foundation, his philanthropic pride and joy, was a sham. While it did fund a few high-profile projects for good PR, the vast majority of its donations were funneled into Vance's own pockets, a tax evasion and money laundering scheme of breathtaking arrogance. The man who built hospitals was stealing from the sick. His public truth was a lie. For Senator Thompson, the first shall be last. The hypocrisy was even more personal. The champion of family values, who had built a career on condemning others' moral failings, was leading a secret life. They found encrypted emails, clandestine financial records, and finally, a secret apartment leased under a false name. She had been paying for the silence of a young male intern with whom she'd had a long-term, coercive affair, a relationship that had destroyed the young man's life. The powerful senator who put herself first would be brought low. "My God," Izzy whispered, staring at the evidence they'd compiled. "He's a moral crusader. He's targeting people who live a public lie. He sees himself as a purifier. He's a murderer who wraps himself in scripture to justify his sickness." Corbin corrected her, his voice grim. "But now we know his criteria. We're not looking for who had a grudge. We're looking for who has a secret big enough to warrant the Echo's attention." This new knowledge was a double-edged sword. It gave them a profile of the killer, highly intelligent, patient, meticulous, and technologically sophisticated, with a deep-seated messiah complex. But it also gave them a victim pool as wide as the city itself. Who among Philadelphia's powerful didn't have a secret? They tried to get ahead of him. They compiled a list of potential targets, influential figures with whispers of scandal around them. A televangelist with rumors of financial impropriety, a judge known for his harsh sentences but rumored to have a gambling problem, a corporate CEO accused of cutting corners on safety. They put quiet surveillance on a dozen different people, a desperate scattershot attempt to predict the lightning. But the Echo was always a step ahead. He didn't choose any of their targets. The third victim was a departure. He wasn't a member of the elite. His name was Ben Carter, a 45-year-old investigative journalist for the Philadelphia Inquirer. He was a dying breed, a tenacious, old-school reporter who lived for the truth and wasn't afraid to make enemies. He was found in his cluttered, paper-strewn apartment by his editor. The scene was the same. No forced entry, no struggle, and the chilling signature of a silver coin on his tongue. Corbin felt a cold pit in his stomach as he stood in the apartment. This was different. Carter wasn't a hypocrite living a double life. If anything, his life was an open book dedicated to exposing the hypocrisy of others. "This doesn't fit the pattern," Izzy said, her voice tight with confusion. Carter wasn't a pillar of the community living a lie. He was the one trying to tear them down. Maybe that's the point, Corbin thought aloud, his eyes scanning the chaos of Carter's work. Notes, documents, and transcripts were pinned to every wall. Vance and Thompson were sins of commission. They did bad things. What if Carter's sin, in the killer's eyes, was one of omission? They tore through Carter's work, focusing on his most recent unpublished investigation. It was a massive expose, the kind of story that could end careers and topple companies. Carter was on the verge of proving that a major pharmaceutical corporation, Omniwell, had deliberately falsified safety data for a new, widely used painkiller. The drug was causing catastrophic liver failure in a small but significant percentage of users, and Omniwell's executives had buried the evidence to protect their profits. And then they found the connection. The CEO of Omniwell was Arthur Vance's biggest business partner. The company had been one of Senator Thompson's largest campaign contributors, and she had personally killed a bill that would have increased FDA oversight on pharmaceutical trials. "It's all connected," Izzy breathed. Vance and Thompson weren't just random hypocrites. They were part of this specific conspiracy. Carter was about to expose them all. "So why kill Carter?" Corbin asked, the pieces clicking into place with a horrifying sound. "Because he didn't publish it fast enough? Because he was waiting for one more source?" The killer saw it as a failure, a truth that was being delayed. For the Echo, justice delayed is justice denied. They immediately pulled the hidden digital file from Carter's laptop. The Latin phrase this time was fiat justitia, ut caelum. Let justice be done, though the heavens fall, Corbin translated. It was a declaration, a mission statement. The Echo wasn't just punishing past sins anymore. He was actively intervening to ensure his twisted version of justice was served. The case had now turned a critical corner. They were no longer just reacting. They had a motive, a connection, a conspiracy. But as they celebrated the small victory, a uniformed officer approached them. "Detective Corbin, we've been reviewing the security footage from the street corner. We thought you'd want to see this." The camera was positioned across the street from Carter's apartment building. The quality was grainy, the angle poor. They watched hours of sped-up footage, a dizzying ballet of pedestrians and traffic. And then Izzy saw it. "Stop. Go back 10 seconds. The officer rewound the footage. There, at 3:17 a.m., 2 nights before Carter's body was found, a generic-looking maintenance van pulled up to the curb. A figure in a dark blue jumpsuit got out, carrying a toolbox. He used a keycard to enter the building's service entrance. He didn't look at the camera. He was just another anonymous night worker in a city full of them. 15 minutes later, he emerged, got back in the van, and drove away. There was no scheduled maintenance for that night, the officer confirmed. "We checked with building management. It was thin. The man's face was obscured by a baseball cap. The license plate of the van was blurry, but it was the first physical lead they had. It was a crack in the Phantom's armor. The company logo on the jumpsuit," Corbin said, pointing at a faint patch on the man's chest. "Can you enhance it?" Izzy was already at a terminal isolating the frames, running them through enhancement software. The image was a pixelated mess, but slowly, a shape emerged. a stylized gear intersected by a lightning bolt. Citywide Technical Solutions, Izzy read, as her program matched the logo to a local company. They're a third-party contractor. They handle HVAC, electrical, and security systems for dozens of commercial and residential buildings across Philadelphia. Corbin's eyes met hers, a spark of grim determination passing between them. Including, Izzy continued, her fingers a blur as she cross-referenced client lists, a penthouse at the residences at Liberty Place, a townhouse in Society Hill, and an apartment complex in Fishtown. She had just named the homes of Arthur Vance, Margaret Thompson, and Ben Carter. The Echo was no longer a ghost. He had a job, and now they had a way to find him. The name, Citywide Technical Solutions, felt like a key turning in a lock that was rusted shut. For weeks, they had been chasing a ghost, a digital phantom who moved through the city's veins without leaving a trace. Now, that ghost had a potential face, a uniform, and a place of employment. The company was a sprawling, anonymous entity with over 500 employees. They were the invisible army that kept the city running, the electricians, security techs, and HVAC specialists who had master keys and access codes to some of the most secure buildings in Philadelphia. The Echo had hidden in plain sight, cloaked in the one uniform nobody ever questions. The first step was to get the employee roster. The company's management, a pair of harried, sweaty brothers, were more than cooperative once Corbin and Izzy laid out the gravity of the situation. The list was a mountain of data. 500 names, addresses, and work histories. 500 potential phantoms. "We can't just start knocking on 500 doors, Corbin said, back in the incident room, which was now dominated by a printout of the entire CTS employee list. "He'll know we're coming. He'll go to ground or accelerate his timetable." "We narrow it down," Izzy said, already plugging the list into the database. "We cross-reference. Who had the technical skills to bypass high-end security? Who had access to all 3 victims' locations? Who fits the psychological profile?" The process was a grueling, painstaking grind. They filtered the list. First, they eliminated anyone who was on vacation or documented sick leave during the murders. That cut the list by 40. Then, they focused on employees with high-level security clearance and expertise in digital systems. Another 200 names fell away. They were left with a pool of 160 potential suspects. While Izzy worked the data, running background checks and searching for any digital anomalies of suspicious online history, a sudden interest in Roman history or biblical text, Corbin did it the old-fashioned way. He started reading the personnel files one by one, looking for a human being inside the data. He was looking for a sign of the zealot, the outcast, the man with a grievance against the world. He found dozens of minor infractions, late arrivals, failed drug tests, arguments with supervisors. He found men with financial troubles, messy divorces, and petty criminal records. He found a sea of everyday desperation, but no monster. Days blurred into nights. The city held its breath, waiting for the Echo to strike again. The silence was more unnerving than another murder would have been. It meant he was planning. It meant the next one would be significant. It was during this deep dive that Corbin stumbled upon something that made the blood in his veins turn to ice. It was in Ben Carter's chaotic apartment, in a box of old research files labeled cold cases. Corbin, following a hunch, had gone back to the scene, believing they must have missed something about Carter's motives. Inside the box, he found a file on a case that had been his own personal ghost for a decade: the unsolved murder of his former partner, Detective Sam Healy. Sam had been shot and killed during what was supposed to have been a routine stakeout of a warehouse suspected of being a hub for stolen electronics. The official story was that the bust went bad, that Sam was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But Corbin had never believed it. There were too many inconsistencies, too many things that didn't add up. The case went cold, and the official investigation was quietly closed, leaving Corbin with a gnawing sense of failure that had defined his career ever since. Carter's file contained notes and theories that mirrored Corbin's own. But Carter had found something Corbin never had. He had found a link. The warehouse Sam was watching wasn't just a fencing operation for stolen goods. It was a disposal site for faulty medical equipment, equipment that was being illegally dumped by a subsidiary company. That subsidiary company, Carter's notes showed, was owned by Omniwell. Corbin stood motionless in the dusty apartment, the file trembling in his hand. His partner hadn't died in a random botched robbery. He had stumbled onto the same corporate conspiracy that Carter had been investigating a decade later. Sam had been silenced. The Echo case was no longer just a job. It was personal. The conspiracy he was chasing wasn't just a motive for a serial killer. It was the reason his best friend was dead. The thought was both terrifying and electrifying. Was the Echo aware of this? Was this all part of his grand, intricate design, a web stretching back a decade? Or was it a horrifying coincidence, two separate timelines of darkness converging on him? He brought his discovery to Izzy. She saw the look in his eyes, the raw, haunted expression that had replaced his usual weary cynicism. "Miles, what does this mean?" she asked gently. "It means the Echo's crusade and my own are intertwined," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "And it means I'm going to find this son of a bitch if it's the last thing I do." The revelation gave him a new, ferocious focus. He went back to the personnel files, no longer just looking for a killer, but for a man who might have a connection, however tenuous, to that warehouse 10 years ago. He and Izzy cross-referenced the CTS employee list with every name associated with the original investigation witnesses, informants, even people cleared of suspicion. And then they got a hit. The name was Raymond Haas. His file was unremarkable. Age 42, a senior security systems technician, employed with CTS for 12 years. Flawless work record. No complaints. Quiet. Kept to himself. He was on the list of 160, but had been a low-priority suspect. But when Izzy ran his name against the Sam Healy case files, a connection appeared. Raymond Haas's younger brother, a troubled kid named Daniel, had been a low-level informant for Sam. Daniel had been the one who tipped Sam off about the warehouse. 2 weeks after Sam's murder, Daniel Haas died of a supposed heroin overdose. The case was closed. "It was never an overdose," Corbin whispered, the truth hitting him like a physical blow. "They silenced him, too. Raymond's brother was murdered." Suddenly, the profile of the Echo clicked into sharp, horrifying focus. Raymond Haas wasn't a random zealot. He was a man who had lost his brother to a corrupt system, a system that protected the powerful men at Omniwell and let killers walk free. He had watched for a decade as the responsible men like Vance and Thompson were celebrated as pillars of the community. His grief had festered, metastasizing into a cold, righteous fury. He had spent years acquiring the skills, the access, the patience to become the Echo. He wasn't just a moral crusader, he was an avenger. He had access to all 3 locations during the time frames of the murders. Izzy confirmed, her voice trembling slightly as she pulled up Haas's work logs. He was servicing the security mainframe in Vance's building, upgrading the firewall in Thompson's home network, and responding to a false alarm at Carter's apartment complex. He used his real credentials. He was so confident. He knew no one would ever look at the maintenance guy. They had him. They had his name, his face, his motive. They had the ghost. The warrant was issued in minutes. The SWAT team assembled with quiet, deadly efficiency. Corbin, his heart pounding a furious rhythm against his ribs, rode with them. This was for Sam. They stormed Raymond Haas's small, neat row house in South Philly at dusk. They blew the door. "Philadelphia police, show me your hands." But the house was empty, eerily so. It was clean, sparse, almost monastic. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication of a hasty departure. It was as if he had simply vanished. But he had left something for them. The back bedroom had been converted into his sanctuary, his war room. The walls were covered not with mad scrawlings, but with precise, detailed charts linking Vance, Thompson, Omniwell, and a dozen other names Corbin didn't recognize. It was Ben Carter's investigation, but magnified, deepened, perfected. It was a decade of silent, meticulous research, a decade of hate. On a simple wooden desk in the center of the room sat a laptop, open and glowing. Beside it was a small velvet bag. Corbin knew what was inside. Izzy approached the laptop. A single text file was open on the screen. There was no Latin this time. It was plain, chilling English. Detective Corbin, you were close. Closer than anyone has been in 10 years. They took your partner. They took my brother. They built an empire on the bodies of good men. I have judged the accomplices. Now I will judge the architect. Justice is coming for him tonight. If you wish to bear witness, find the place where the city first declared its soul. Corbin's mind raced. Where the city first declared its soul. Independence Hall. A sudden, horrifying realization struck him. He looked at the charts on the wall, his eyes following the lines of power to the man at the very top of the conspiracy. A man whose name hadn't been mentioned in the press. A man so powerful he was untouchable. The final target. And on the desk, next to the laptop, was a small, framed photograph. It was an old photo of two smiling young boys, their arms slung around each other's shoulders. Raymond and Daniel Haas. Next to it was another photo, one that made Corbin's breath catch in his throat. It was a faded picture of two rookie cops, young and full of hope, grinning in front of their first patrol car. It was him and Sam Healy. The Echo hadn't just known about his connection to the case. He had been watching Corbin. This entire series of murders, this bloody crusade, had been leading to this. It wasn't just a judgment. It was an invitation. A phone on the desk began to ring. A sharp, piercing sound in the silent room. Izzy looked at Corbin, her eyes wide. Corbin nodded slowly, his hand reaching for the phone. He knew who was calling. The Echo was ready for his final sermon, and he had chosen Corbin to be his congregation.